Hello folks, to kick off a mini series of guides for the final patch of the War Within 12.2.7, I'm going to take a look at something that you can actually start working on and indeed even finish right now before the patch drops, and that's the War Within meta achievement, World Soul Searching. As is common for expansion-wide meta achievements, this does have a pretty interesting mount, the Gear Grinder Mark II, which is basically the ride that originally belonged to the first boss of the Undermine raid, Vexy and the Gear Grinders. But that's not all. As befits the patch that will be introducing player housing for the first time, there is also a housing related reward, the Drained Dark Heart of Galakrond. Expansion-wide meta achievements usually do take a ton of work, and often they'll have a few requirements that are only available occasionally. And this one is no different, with two of the main achievements having a bit of a time gate, and one of those, that time gate, is pretty RNG. But before I get to those, probably the most problematic achievements will be the first two, Nerebar Palace and Liberation of Undermine, which, if you haven't already done them, do require that you complete the first two raids of the expansion in any difficulty. This does include LFR difficulty. The problem with these is that, of course, there aren't as many groups doing them right now. However, when 11.2.7 does release, I do think that there will likely be a short-term blip in the number of runs as folks try to get the meta done. So if you do still have to clear the raids, I'd personally recommend trying to knock them out in the first week of the new patch. As well as FLFR, there are usually groups that run normal for transmog, and as most people do now outgear the first two raids content, those groups tend not to be as gatekeepy as current content groups can be. The next achievement is a bit more straightforward, as it's the one to do the current raid, and that is a lot easier to find groups for, especially in LFR. So as long as you're not completely averse to doing group content, this one I think will be pretty easy to knock off. The next achievement that I want to cover will be the one that will probably take you the longest, and that is Glory of the Delver, the meta achievement for Delves. And that is due to the first step, Delve Lore Master. This achievement requires you to do every story for every Delve in the War Within. Basically, each delve has a bunch of story variants with slightly different objectives and sometimes different bosses to do. Now, if you were lucky enough to complete this achievement early on in the expansion, you won't have to do the more recent delves, but if you're starting out, well, you're going to have to do them all. Delve stories rotate on a daily basis, so you can only do one story for each delve in the same day, but you can knock them out in level 1, and that does make them pretty quick to do. You can check which story is up in any delve by mousing over the delve entrance on the main map. The story name is in the tooltip, so no need to travel to the delve entrance to check if the story that you need is up on any given day. The main challenge is that, as far as we know, the rotation of the stories is RNG, and that will likely mean that there will be a couple of stories that will stubbornly go missing for a couple of weeks. The one upside is that these stories, when they are live, do last for the entire day, so there's no need to check into the game at specific times. Leave no treasure unfound is to find all of the one-off treasures in every delve. These treasures do show up in the minimap and are mostly pretty easy to find. I personally recommend that you do not use the consumable item that makes curios show up in the map as well, as that will make it a bit more confusing to track down those treasures. There are though a couple of delve treasures that are a little bit more awkward. In Skittering Breach, when the Shadow Realm story is up, the chests are not visible when you're inside the Shadow Realm. If you do want to get the chests while doing that story, what you need to do is to clear the delve first and then backtrack to get them. In the Spiral Weave, one of the chests is only reachable when the story from the Weaver with Love is active, and two others cannot be reached when Strange Disturbances is active. In the Underkeep, one of the chests is unreachable during the Weaver Rescue story, and another chest is missing during the Torture Victim story. And finally, for the Archival Assault, a couple of the chests are up in ledges or in pipes that can only be reached by using your extra action button to propel yourself to the ledge or to survive falling damage. The next achievement, Spore Sweeper, is pretty easy. Just do a Fungarian Delve, that is either Mycomancer or Fungal Folly, without getting hit by any of the exploding spores on a tier 8 or higher. Spider Sense requires doing a Nerubian Delve, that is either Earthcrawl, Dread Pit, Spider Weave or Underkeep, without blundering into a web or triggering a Nerubian Egg. Again, this one has to be done on a tier 8 or higher. Personally, I find this achievement a lot easier to do when you're in a delve where you have the webs on the ground rather than the ones with the Nerubian eggs, as it's really easy to accidentally clip one of the eggs with one of your abilities, and that will of course ruin the run for you. The Daystormer achievement is to complete the Order of the Night Delve. That's either Nightfall or Skittering Breach, while avoiding the artillery fire. And again, you get the idea, it requires a tier 8 or higher. Brand development is probably the easiest of the delve achievements, as it just requires you getting Brand to level 25. This just means that you need to run a few delves until he hits level 25, which is actually super fast now, thanks to a very aggressive catch-up mechanism. The last 3 achievements are to do the 3 seasonal nemesis bosses. That's the single boss delves. If you completed these in an earlier season, then the good news is that you don't need to redo it for Kyvesa. You can do all of these on the single question mark difficulty, which is the easy mode, and the first 2 are pretty easy now with season 3 gear. Kyvesa though is a bit more of a challenge, as it's more about avoiding her attack than actually doing DPS, although of course having a lot more DPS does help. If you haven't defeated Kyvesa already, then I recommend that you set aside a few hours and just do the fight repeatedly until you get used to the mechanics, and you will eventually luck out. And if all else fails, this will only get easier later on as you get more gear during the season. Doing all of these delve achievements will also award you a mount, the Ivory Goliath. And now that we've got the hardest bit out of the way, let's dive into the rest. All That Khaz involves doing a bunch of exploration related patch 11.00 achievements. Khazalgar Flightmaster requires getting all of the flight points in the original zones. For that, you just need to fly around and visit all of the flight masters. They are marked on the map, so this is super easy to do. Khazalgar Glyph Hunter involves collecting all of the dragon riding glyphs. The easiest way to do this is to get the add-on Handy Notes and Handy Notes The War Within, which will mark them on the map for you. Lore Master of Khazalgar requires that you complete all of the main storylines and the Sojourner achievements, which basically require that you do all of the side stories for every zone. If you haven't done these, just look for exclamation marks on the main map, which will guide you to the starting quests for any stories that you've missed. Some side stories were locked by later parts of the campaign, so don't panic if you cannot finish a zone initially. You'll likely just need to finish all of the campaign and then loop back to catch up on the side stories that you missed first time around. Khazalgar Lore Hunter involves finding a bunch of lore items dotted around the original War Within zones. This is very similar to looting treasures, and if you have the Handy Notes plugins, they will all be marked on your map for you. Khazalgar Diplomat just asks that you hit Renown 25 with the 4 original main reputations. If you haven't managed to do this by now, all you need to do is do the main world events for each zone every week, and do as many world quests here as you can. And one thing to be aware of is that the weekly dungeon quest also awards a ton of reputation for a faction of your choice. And allied races, Earthen requires unlocking the Earthen allied race. This just requires doing a bunch of quest lines that you have to do anyway for Lore Master, followed by a brief introductory quest to the race itself. The next achievement, War Within Pathfinder, is basically free, as it almost completely overlaps with All That Khaz. The one possible exception to that is the Explorer achievement, which might require visiting a couple of out of the way areas, but even that is pretty hard to miss while you were getting all of the Flight Pass and Glyph Hunter achievement. Next up is Xal Not Pass from patch 11.07. I did do a video guide at the time for this particular achievement, and I'm going to splice it in here. This achievement awards the Shadow of Doubt mount, a black recolor of the Shadowlands Mythic Plus mount. The nice thing about this is that it enables us to get a bit of a head start instead of having to guess what could be in it. While we will have to wait until the new patch launches to get into the new content parts of the achievement, there is a bunch of stuff that we can get started on right now. And in this video, I'll be running through all of those requirements, both existing and new. As part of the achievement, there are now zone-wide meta achievements for each of the existing zones, which collect together a compendium of existing achievements. But let's get started with the Isle of Dorn. Each of those zone achievements requires us to do the Zone Adventurer achievement, which requires us to get 10 rares from the zone. The easiest way to do these is with the add-on Rare Scanner, which will pop up an announcement whenever a rare is seen on your map. By default, this can be very noisy, as it will alert on everything in the game, so I personally recommend spending some time going through the settings and only enabling the rares and other items that you actually need. That way, instead of training yourself to just ignore the alerts, you can be sure that if one goes off, it is something that you will want to deal with. The other common achievement is the Treasures achievement. This requires you to loot every one of the one-time treasures in the zone. The good news is that in my experience, all of these treasures are up all of the time, and it usually takes you at most 15 to 20 minutes to do it in each zone. The easiest way to do them is to use the Handy Notes add-on with the Handy Notes War Within extension, which will show you the location of all of the treasures on your map. Now, I do hope that you've been doing the Theatre Troupe event, or you don't mind doing it, because this is a major feature of the Isle of Dorn achievement. We're Here All Night requires that you complete all of the plays in the theatre event. The event starts every hour on the hour, and the plays rotate. With only 5 plays, this isn't super hard to do, especially as those events rotate in exactly the same order as listed in the achievement. Chances are that if you've been doing this event every week, you already have this finished. The other achievement for this event, A Star of Dawn, requires you to unlock all of the available actor perks. These perks come from many quests, which unlock at certain renown levels with the Earthen, the final one unlocking at renown 21. If you haven't picked them up already, just go down to the theatre area and do any of the quests you find there. You can do them at any time. You don't need to wait for the event to be active. Now, you've probably seen the big hammer down in the engineering area in Donegal, or if you haven't seen it, you'll have at least heard it. But have you tried what happens if you stand under it? Well, now you have a good reason to. Flat Earthen is the achievement for falling victim to an industrial accident in the centre of Dorn. And finally, the last achievement of this group is Rock to Sleep. This actually happens in the Ringing Deeps and requires you to travel around and visit some of the inert earthen and read the little memorial plaque. The locations of these are included in Handy Note, but I'd suggest doing this, which takes at most maybe 10 minutes to do, at the same time as you do the Ringing Deeps achievements. You'll see why in a minute. Rage Against the Machine is a new achievement for the Ringing Deeps, and again it starts off by doing those Adventurer and Treasure achievements. You know the deal by now. It's not much, but its honest work requires you to complete the Awakening of the Machine event by getting all 20 waves in a single sitting. Thankfully, we are now mostly geared up that this is straightforward to do. Supersized Snuffling requires you to loot 100 odd globs of wax. You get those from digging up those little snuffling patches. If you've been doing the weekly quest for this, you'll probably already have it complete by now. But if not, I personally find that Hallowfall is the easiest area to farm those patches. The next achievements are best done together, along with the Rock to Sleep from the Isle of Dorn, as they basically all involve a tour of the Ringing Deep. Notable Machines requires you to find a set of notes that are just lying on the ground all over the zone, and Not So Quick Fix requires you to fix 6 broken earthen consoles. Again, Handy Notes will have you covered for the location of all of these, and doing them all will probably take you at most 30 minutes. The final Ringing Deeps achievement is To All the Slimes I Love. This basically requires you to find a bunch of critters and /love them. There's a really good post in Wowhead, which I will link below, with coordinates for all the various types of critters. I found that this list of coordinates combined with a target macro that's also included in those comments makes them all pretty easy to find. There are multiple of the same critter in each of their locations, and you can potentially just complete this along with those other achievements I mentioned a moment ago. Crystal Chronicles is a Hallowfall achievement, and yes, as you can guess, you've got to do the Adventurer and Treasure achievements to get started. The Missing Links is another tour type achievement. This time you're looking for lynx pets to wilt/pet. Handy Note can help with this, but one thing you should be aware of is that the lynxes that are in the area around the Spreading the Light event are only present when the big key flames are active. So if you can't find any of the lynxes over there, you may need to put some radiant essences into the key flames to get them to light up. Staying with the zone tour in Biblo Archivist requires you to find a bunch of lore books. These again are always up, and the Handy Notes is your ally with this one too. Meroldar Menace requires you to find a bunch of rocks lying around Meroldar and throw them at stuff and basically just be a bit of a vandal. If you've done the Orphanage World quest, you'll probably have already used the stone on a target. I'll again link to the Wowhead post with explanations of where to find the rocks and their various targets. One thing to be aware of is that once you pick the rock up, it severely restricts your movement, so it's worth spacing your target before you pick the rock to make it a lot easier to do. Staying on the subject of the Orphanage World quest, this is needed for Children's Entertainer. This one is a bit annoying to do because you can only do 4 of the objectives each time the world quest is up, and that world quest seemed to only appear occasionally and very randomly. The hardest of the achievement to do is the floor is undersea, which is basically a bit of a jumping puzzle. There's also a few achievements which are related to Spreading the Light. But the good news is that if you've been doing the event, you'll probably have either finished or be close to finishing many of these. Beacon of Hope requires you to do all of the daily quests from the little key flames. Now, each key flame has 3 to 4 different quests, but they do rotate in order as you do them. But each key flame will only give you 1 quest per week, so this can take up to 4 weeks to complete. Sharing the Light just requires you to complete each of the main bonus events in the area at least once. And igniting the key flames requires you to contribute 100 Radiance Remnants to those key flames. Just completing that Beacon of Hope will get you quite a long way into completing this. But unlocking the big key flames when they're not available can also help to complete it a lot more quickly. Lost and Found requires you to complete quests offered by Mera Ashlid. The way this works is that it's time gated over 3 weeks. Basically, she'll give you a quest every week to get 3 items. Those 3 items then give you hand-in quests. I will link to the Wowhead guide down below for where you can find everything and where to hand it all in. Right, moving on to Azj-Kahet. And yes, again, you're going to start off by doing those Adventurer and Treasure achievements. You Can't Hang With Us requires you to get kicked out of the City of Threads. Just go near one of the guards with True Sight, and after a minute or so, another NPC called a Surika Eradicator will show up and start casting a stacking debuff on you. Let that stack up to 10 and you'll get webbed and kicked out. Now, if you've already bought the Queen's Pheromones without having completed this achievement, that's not a major issue. Just go up to one of the big guards and attack it to get it to pay attention to you, and you'll get kicked out eventually anyway. The Unseeming requires you to get to 100 stacks of Unseeming Shift in the bottom area of the zone, which is called the Maddening Deeps. The easiest way to do this is to stand in one of the blood pools in the area. But do be aware that this does do damage, so if you're not a tank, you may need to step out and heal up. But don't worry, the stacks do not drop off until you leave the area completely, so it's perfectly okay to step out, just take a little bit of breather, and then step back in to get those stacks to stack up. Worm Theory requires you to do the world quests in either the Worm Tunnels or the settlement of Rak-Ush. This is subject to a lot of RNG, but basically you just watch for the 3 quests listed in the achievement being up and do them when you can. New quests in Azj-Kahet spawn every 3 days, but you do need to unlock the weekly Severed Threads pack in order to see those world quests. Itsy Bitsy Spider requires you to find the little named Weave Rat spiders. Now, in my experience, the majority of these tend to hang about the Weaver's lair, so just having a little target macro can usually find out where they are fairly quickly. The one exception is the Scampering Weave Rat. This is something that patrols in a wide area in the City of the Threads, but if you go to this particular location, you can basically just wait for one to come running past. Again, having a target macro helps a lot. The last 2 achievements require you to be under the influence of polymorphic translation and are best done together. You can buy the potion of polymorphic translation from the vendor Ceasefire down in the city of Threads here. The achievements called Smelling History and Bookworm both require you to find various lore books around the zone and collect them while under the influence of that potion. Again, Handy Notes does the trick. And that's basically everything that you're able to work on right now until the next patch launches. Once 1107 does come out, we are going to have some new requirements for the brand new I'll Remember You achievement, which awards the Breaks song, a brand new recolor of the ship mount. A Song of Secrets requires you to do the main storyline, simply just following through the quest line that starts inside the main town in Dornagal. Once the patch drops, should see this done. Serenity now is to do all of the weekly quests. Now, the spawn rate of the individual weekly quests isn't super clear because it's been accelerated on the PTR, but from what we understand from Blizzard, it's going to require 6 weeks to get them all, which happens to be the same time it's going to take to rank up the new ring. Excavation Projects requires you to do the 3 main excavation events. These are activated by contributing your new currency, Flame Blessed Iron, to fill a bar. Once you fill the bar, the event is activated, and all you need to do is to head over and kill the rare that spawns. You don't actually need to be a contributor in order to kill the rare. You can just turn up if someone else activates it. And because of that, I do recommend prioritizing this one early on in the new patch when a lot of people are doing it. Clean up on Isle Siren is the equivalent of the Adventurer achievement. The bad news is that this one does require all of the available rares. So hopefully they're not going to be too rare, otherwise it will turn in to be as much of a pain as the Forbidden Reach one was to do. Treasures of the Storm asks you to loot 10 ruined stormed chests. I found quite a few of those in the waters around the coast of the Isle on the PTR. 10 doesn't seem to me to be a very large amount, so hopefully this one will not be as painful as the treasures in the Forgotten Reach were to farm. And finally, Acquire of Citrine requires getting all of the special Citrine gems that you can socket into the new ring. And now it's back to present day Fury. At the time of the video, we didn't know how to get the Citrine gems, but now we do. And the easiest way to get them is to do the 3 special encounter bosses on the island, but they can also drop from the weekly chest, and many are also purchasable from the vendors in the main camp. Next up is the patch 11.20 achievement Going Goblin mode. Adventurer of Undermine requires defeating just 10 of the rares in Undermine. These rares have a very short spawn timer, so I personally recommend installing the add-on rare scanner and then just doing a little bit of a patrol around the central part of the zone. There are some weekly lockout rares which do appear on the main map no matter where you are, but the daily lockout rares only appear when you're close to them, so it is worth travelling about a bit while you wait for your 10 rares to show up. Treasures of Undermine is super easy. Again, Handy Notes and the War Within plugin will put them on the main map for you to make them easier to find. And as you're going around picking those treasures, you also want to do the next achievement, 9/10 of the Law. This requires unlocking all of the Muff's auto lockers. These are basically 5 extra treasure chests, and again, Handy Notes is your friend. Once you've looted all of the chests, you want to combine the items that you get, which will give you a quest to turn in, which will also award a cool pet. Reading between the lines is a pretty standard find and read all the lore books in the zone, and is another job for the ever dependable Handy Notes plugin. That Can Do attitude requires kicking the little cans that are dotted all around the zone 25 times in total. It is possible to kick the same can repeatedly. They despawn after about 3 to 4 kicks or so, so you do need to find quite a few of them. The best place to find the cans is in the beach area. Just walking around the pool at the beach and you'll find enough to kick. But honestly, those cans are so common that once you start looking for them, and they do sparkle a bit, you'll find them lying about everywhere. You're My Friend Now is a really cool little achievement. There are 5 interactable rats dotted around the zone. I'll put their coordinates down below, or you can use Handy Notes. Interacting with the rats will have them jump up on your shoulder for a little while. Collect all 5 of the rats and you're done. And doing all of these will award you the Galagio Warbound background for your login screen. And finally, we have Unravelling and Persevering, the patch 11.20 achievement. Again, this is one that I did a video guide for at launch, and so I'll splice that back in now. Remnants of a Shattered World is the achievement to get most of the rares in Koresh, and as usual, this is the most awkward one to complete, especially as we have to get all of the rares and not just 10 of them. Thankfully, most of the rares do have a relatively short 15 to 20 minute spawn timer. I was able to get the majority of them done in just 90 minutes. As always, I recommend that you use the add-on Rare Scanner, which will sound an audio alert whenever a rare appears on the map. Rare Scanner can be very noisy by default, and if you just leave it like that, I personally find that you end up teaching your brain to start ignoring the alert. To avoid that, I always recommend that you go through the settings and disable any rares and treasures that you don't need. That way, whenever an alert does fire, you know that it is something that you need to pay attention to. Now, while most of the rares are pretty easy to deal with, there are 5 that I do think are worth calling out. 2 of the rares are Grubber and Akana Munga Soza. These are part of the Warrant system. This is a series of 6 rotating weekly quests, and these rares are only active in the weeks where the respective quests are available. But the good news is that that weekly Warrant quest will allow you to summon the rare on demand. So basically, all you need to do is to wait for a week when the warrant is up, and then make sure that you get it done. The other 3 rares are Orith, Ixar, and Tharbs. These are elite rares which have a much longer shared spawn timer, which can be up to 3 hours. Unlike the other rares which only appear on the mini-map when you are somewhat near their location, these rares act like the Undermine weekly lockout rares, having a marker which appears in both the mini-map and the main map whenever you are in Koresh, regardless of what phase you're in. These rares do have quite a lot of health, which gives you plenty of time to get to them. I personally recommend that you go ahead and do all of the other rares first, and anytime an alert for one of these 3 comes up, you head straight over and get it done. Even if that does mean that you miss out on one of the minor rares spawning, the much shorter spawn timers means that it's not too painful to head back and catch the next spawn, certainly when compared to having to camp one of these ones for up to 3 hours. And staying in the subject of Starbs, this rare spawns way up at the top of the Oasis Ecodome. And to get to it, what you need to do is to go to the phase diving portal near Venari. Then use that phase conduit, and once you enter the phase diving space at the location, you will find another portal along with a casting broker. Stand next to that portal and you'll get an extra action button. Hit that and you'll be punted up to where the rare is. Just be careful not to exit phase diving by accident when you do so. Treasures of Koresh is mostly straightforward. The treasures all have very low respawn timers of 1 to 5 minutes. So if a treasure isn't up when you go to do it, just wait a minute or 2 for it to respawn. The treasures are roughly 50-50 between normal and phase diving space. This particular screenshot has all the normal treasures in green. I will put a link down below with a very useful Wowhead comment with all of the locations, but there are a few of the treasures that are worth calling out because they are a little bit more involved. The first of these mailroom distribution requires you to click in a cart outside of the mailroom and then head into the room. Inside you will see 4 circles. Just stand in each of the circles and use your extra action button. After doing all 4, the treasure will spawn and give you a cool cosmetic hearthstone. For Gift of the Brothers, you'll find that in normal space, and what you need to do to get the treasure is to click on a lantern at this location. After clicking of it, you then need to go and find 3 ghostly brothers at these locations. Talk to each of them and then head back to your starting point and you'll find the treasure. The Ancient Coffer requires you to collect and read 2 items first. The first of these is a battered book at this location, and then a submerged bottle which you will find here. After reading both of those, the treasure will spawn up on the inside edge of the tower. Now, the other 3 I want to talk to is the Bladed Rifle of Unfettered Momentum, the Petrified Branch of Jaina, and the Safadi Skiff Lantern. These are all found in phase diving space, but they are in islands which do not have phase diving conduits to help you get to them. The easiest way to get to these treasures is to find an untethered Zaibuka. This is a potion that allows you to enter phase diving space anywhere you are, along with giving you increased jump distance. These potions you can find lying about in phase diving space, usually in and around the various camps. If you don't happen to have one, and they can be a bit of a pain to find, then you can also use things like Goblin Gliders, Warrior's Leap, Warlock Portals to reach them, or in the case of the Blade Rifle, abilities like Bubble or Glide, which will allow you to survive falling damage. Moving on to Explore Karesh, and this is the usual zone-wide exploration achievement. You'll very likely get the majority of these just by doing the campaign and side quests. The potential exception is Vanquisher's Wake. This is a small island off the beaten track here, and it is a dedicated PvP area, so do be careful when you head over. Bounty Seeker is basically to do the 6 weekly warrant quest lines that I mentioned earlier. Now, I'm not sure if these are on a strict rotation or are just random at the moment, but aside from some of the quests being a little annoying to do, they're mostly straightforward to do once you've get them. Dangerous Prowlers of Karesh is the traditional achievement asking you to pet some critters and requires you to hunt down 6 cat-like creatures. I'll link to a Wowhead comment with the locations down below, with only one of them being in phase diving space. The one thing to be aware of is that you need to target the critter and then use the /pet emote. Even if the critter has an option to just click to pet, that does not count. Now, 2 of the critters, Little Miss Phaser and Karashaya, constantly appear and disappear in roughly 15-second cycles. The easiest way to deal with these is to set up a target macro and then just spam it as soon as they appear. Power of the Reshi is probably the easiest achievement as it's to max out the cloak, something that most of us are going to be doing anyway. If you're somehow behind on it, the easiest way to farm the threads that you need to get it upgraded is to run tier 1 delves, as each delve will give you a thread right up until you hit the weekly cap. And finally, Secrets of the Kareshi is to find and read a bunch of lore books that are lying around in normal and phase diving space. These are always up and very easy to find. And the easiest way to do this achievement is to install the Handy Notes War Within Treasures and Rares add-on. This will add a magnifying glass to the main and mini maps for each of the books. But if you don't want to install that add-on, then I will link to a Wowhead comment with all of the locations down below. And that's it for the War Within meta achievement. I do think that this one was a bit less annoying to do than Dragonflight's was. I still personally bear the scars of having to do those elemental storms. And in comparison to that, this was a pretty enjoyable wee journey. If you've already done all or part of this achievement and have any tips to share, then let us all know in the comments down below. And if you haven't, then I'd be super interested to hear which parts of this achievement you're most looking forward to doing, and of course, what are the ones that you're not? Given that meta achievements seem to be a part of the expansion formula these days, in Midnight, I plan to do some patch meta guides as we go along. The aim being to complete as much as possible before the final meta achievement releases, so do make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, as well as getting notifications when those videos eventually release. It does help to make my videos more visible to a wider audience, which all goes on to help me to continue to make them. I also have a few other guide videos planned for patch 11.27 over the next few weeks, and you'll be able to keep up to date in all of those by following me on social media, links down below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.